All right, well, let's get started today. We got a couple of things. You probably got an email from the UAR. They have updated some of the forms, and so we're going to go over some of those updates. If you remember back when this happened in August, Russ and I both said we're going back to the UAR's exclusive right to sell because in the next 6 months or so, we're going to see lots of changes based off of what the market's doing, based off of reaction from people, based off of problems that come up. So that's one of the reasons why this changes has happened, is because there's been some questions, been some confusion, and so we're trying to get that fixed. So we're going to go over some of those changes today, which hopefully will be a benefit to you guys. But I wouldn't expect this to be the final draft either. In fact, if you watch the video from the attorney and the UAR president, they both said this is they're just kind of a rough draft going through it. So I would imagine we'll see some changes in the next little bit as well. So it would be best if you're using the exclusive right to sell. Russ, we got it on Wednesday, so we gave it to dotloop Wednesday, and I don't know how long it takes them to upload it, but the correct form is still in the MLS. You can pull that out from the MLS. So if it's not on dotloop yet, you can get it off the MLS. You can still use the one that's in the dotloop. It's just these sections won't be updated. So I'm gonna share my screen. We're gonna go to the exclusive right to sell first. Okay, so this is the exclusive right to sell. There's only really one section, well, there's two sections that they've kind of changed, but one they've added in here. So we're going to jump down to brokerage compensation, section 2. Section 2.1 is going to be the same as what we had before, seller's brokerage fee. And that's going to be what you're charging as a listing agent. So we had a debate going back and forth here on how to best handle an unrepresented client. Do I put the full amount there and do an addendum later? I know of an agent who would always just do an addendum at the start saying that if I represented the client, then the commission would be one thing. If I didn't represent them, it would be another. So that was a big concern for a lot of people. So they've added this 2.2 into the contract. Seller's brokerage fee with an unrepresented buyer. If a buyer is not represented by the brokerage, the seller and the company agree that the company may have additional liability and responsibilities in the transaction. Seller agrees that blank percent or blank dollars of the gross acquisition price shall be added to the brokerage fee. Okay, so this is where you're getting where you can charge for an unrepresented buyer or a limited agency situation where you don't have to change it anymore. You can just put it in there. I want to bring attention to this part right here because some of us don't realize that we're getting additional liability and responsibilities when we take on another client. When we are representing two sides of it, we're looking at saying, oh, we'll give a deal for the seller and we'll just represent them. We're not going to get covered for that. If you're got another transaction there and you're helping facilitate that, it does add some liability and responsibilities. So you should charge something here. And if it is represented and they're paying somewhere else, then this money, this amount does not add to it. It only adds to it if they're unrepresented. So now you don't have to go back and change both things. So this section 2.1 is going to be the amount you're charging for the listing portion of it. And then if they're unrepresented, 2.2 is going to be there. And then 2.3, this is, I've got a lot of calls on this one, authorization to offer compensation to buyer's brokerage. This is just authorizing us to advertise. So right here, it says company is authorized to advertise or otherwise communicate that the seller and or the company is offering to pay a compensation to the buyer brokerage in the amount of the gross acquisition price. Okay, they're only authorizing us. This is not where it's guaranteeing that they have to pay this. It's not telling the seller that it's going to be part of the offer. It's just saying that they're authorizing us to advertise it. So we can advertise it, but something else needs to happen in order for that to take place. One is either the broker compensation agreement, which we're going to go through a little bit here in a second, and the second one is in the REPC. Those are the two ways that confirm that the buyer is going to get paid through the transaction from the actual seller. If one of those is not completed, then it doesn't matter what this number is. If this number says 3% of the gross acquisition price, but nothing is in the REPC and no broker compensation is there, the seller is not obligated to pay that 3%. So that's one question I keep getting, is this is just authorizing us to offer it. It's not saying that they're going to sign it and agree to it after that. It does add a new section down here. This is a checkbox. Seller does not authorize the company to enter into a written compensation agreement with the buyer brokerage. Okay, so this isn't saying they won't pay it. They're just saying, as you as the listing brokerage, I'm not going to authorize you to have a written compensation agreement. So you're not, if that box is checked, you're not going to be doing a buyer compensation agreement at all. Before we leave section 2, any questions on commission, where that goes, any of these changes?
Can I just ask a question? So let's see, I can't remember it. It's up to, so that so if you have a 3% that they said, well, I don't know how much I want to actually give a buyer's agent, but this is like up to that. So we had 3%. And they said maybe it depended on how much, if they gave a full price offer or something like that. So I just wanted to clarify that piece, that not necessarily in the REPC does it have to be that same amount, correct?
Yeah, correct. Correct. This is just them authorizing it. In fact, let's say they authorize you to offer up to 1% in this section 2.3. And then on the REPC, it comes in at 3%. That doesn't have anything to do with this. All that has to do is that you're authorized to offer up to 1%. So I think that's one of the confusions that questions that I keep getting is, do I have to, like, what if that number's different? Now that does come into play into the next document that we're going to talk about here in a second, but and I'll explain that in a second, but did that make sense, Chris?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Jason, one other,
Before, did you have something?
yeah, just one other slight difference too on these, which is not that big of a difference, but you'll notice that it says unless checked below, the company may enter into a written compensation agreement. So they're giving us the permission basically to go ahead and do that and enter into that compensation agreement versus the other one, the way it said it was in the event the company enters into a compensation agreement. So, I mean, a slight difference, but just kind of just want to make sure that the agents understand that when your client does this, we could automatically just enter into this compensation agreement with the other brokerage.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last thing they changed on this is they just added this bold, just so that broker fees are fully negotiable and are not set by law or board or association of realtors, multiple listing services, or any manner other than between the company and the seller. So obviously anything that we can do to help protect us, that's why they're putting that in there. They bolded it, so that will be something that they've added back in there. Well, didn't add it in there, just made it bold so that everyone could see it. When we get to the real estate brokerage compensation agreement, okay, so the only time that we're using the brokerage compensation agreement is when us as a brokerage is offering the compensation through us. So if it comes through on the REPC and they're asking the seller directly for compensation, this form would not be used unless there is a difference in the price Like for example, not the price, the commission. For example, let's say in the REPSI, they asked for, actually, let me go back to this so that I don't confuse you. Let's say that right here in section 2.3, I'm authorized to give 1%. And then in the contract, they're asking for 3%. If they ask for 3% there, I will not have any brokerage compensation agreement signed. But if they understand that we're giving them 1%, you could see 2% in the REPSI and then a 1% broker compensation come over. So that's the only time you're going to do those twice. But what I want you to keep in mind from here is that unless you're authorized up here, unless you're authorized in section 2.3, you're not going to be filling out the broker compensation agreement. That's the only time that you're going to ever use the broker compensation agreement, is if you're authorized to do that. The other key is, unless you're authorized to a certain amount. So if that amount exceeds that on the broker compensation agreement, you would not be signing it. If you did sign it, that would come out of your portion of the commission, because you're agreeing to pay more than the seller offered. So that would come out of yours. So don't do that. Go back to this example. If 2.3 said 1% and they send over broker compensation that said 3%, you would not be signing that, because they're only authorizing us as a brokerage to offer up to 1%. So you would not be signing a 3% number on that. So one of the problems that we've had is, let's say that we had authorization to give 1%, and the agent sent over a broker compensation with 3% on there. Up until now, what we would have to do is we would have to just throw that away and not do anything with it. And then they'd have to write a whole new one that fixed that problem. We now have this real estate broker compensation agreement addendum. So the only thing, and Russ, maybe you can see this, there isn't a way to counter this.
Yeah, so Jason, I think, yeah, there's not really a way to counter it. So the idea would be, let's say that you agreed to the compensation agreement with them, and then later on you were going to change it, is really the only time you would use this. So yeah, you would still, if they sent it for 3 and you were wanting it to be 1, you'd have to just do a whole new form.
Yeah. So that, hopefully that's clear, because that was that's the one thing, this addendum, there's an addendum to the compensation. So if during the transaction you've already agreed to something, and then they decide that they're going to change that, let's say that the buyer's agent's going to give some of their commission back to their client, that's what this real estate broker compensation agreement addendum does. So it gives you an opportunity to start to mess with that without having to change it and create new ones. The other thing that's added in, which we've had multiple problems as a brokerage, where title company sends over net commission, and it's all the documents up until now have always been gross. And so we've always had to look at it and say, well, what do we do? They still owe us a little bit more money, or something like that. They've now added this into the broker compensation agreement, that you can pay gross or net of acquisition price. So whatever one they check there is the one that the money is going to go off of. So that will help clear up some of that confusion, because in our agreement, in our exclusive right to sell, everything's still off of gross. But if they're, it's right here, gross acquisition price. If for some chance they're asking lots of closing costs, the seller probably would not want to pay off of gross. So they would probably expect this net acquisition price here. So that gives you an option to do both of them now, where before it was all just gross, and people were assuming that they could do net, but now you can. So any questions on any of those 3 documents that we've gone through? Okay, so let's see here. The only other ones, so they updated the land contract. I'm not going to pull up the land contract right now, but the difference in the land contract is it now matches more closely with the REPC that we had, the residential REPC. So before they hadn't updated the commission in there. Now you can put the buyer's commission directly in the REPC for the land one, and that's the only change on that one. They updated the limited agency consent form. They did that one similar to this exclusive right to sell, where the only thing they really changed is they added this section right here that says brokerage fees are fully negotiable and are not set by law or any board. So they wanted to make sure that that document stated that as well. And then we had these other 3 documents. So those are the 5 documents that they've updated. I would imagine that in the next couple of months, we'll see more changes as we need them. So I think it's valuable that if you guys are using the contract and you're like, oh, this doesn't work, or this is kind of dumb, maybe reach out to the UAR forums and just give them some suggestions, because as they're making suggestions, they very well could consider some of the things that you think are important as well, versus when you have a document that's been there for, you know, a year, 2 years, or 3 years, they're less likely to go in and change something simple. But right now, these documents are being changed because of input from us as agents. So if you have questions about it, or if you have an idea, I would suggest reaching out and giving them those suggestions. Any questions?
And
Okay.
just to reiterate what Jason said earlier, is just I have submitted these all to dotloop. It's just a matter of how long it takes them to go get all the fields populated. So hopefully within the next few days, but could be a week or so, I don't know. But we'll get them replaced in dotloop just as soon as possible.
Yep. And if they're not updated in dotloop, if you need them like today or tomorrow, you can always pull them off the MLS. They're not in the SkySlope. I checked there this morning. They're not ready for filling them out in SkySlope, but you can actually just get the form and pull it out. You could actually put it in dotloop yourself and fill it out that way if you are familiar with that. If not, then maybe print it. All right. So if any questions about those or anything else? Okay, fantastic. You guys have a wonderful week. Next week is Thanksgiving, so the office will be closed Thursday and Friday, so we won't have a compliance call next Friday. But have a fun weekend as well. And if you have any questions in the meantime, always reach out to either Russ or myself.
Hey, Jason, will you guys just let us know when those documents are all in dotloop?
Yeah. Once
Okay.
we
Once they're all in there, okay.
Yeah, we can do that. The hard part is we just don't know their time frame. I think everybody's
Sure.
at this point is just like in August, everyone submitted them to dotloop. So they get overwhelmed with it. So I don't know how fast they'll do it, but hopefully they'll do it quickly.